Welcome to the series of Oracle Fusion middleware video lessons. In this video, I will cover about XML and XSD one more time with an example. Maybe I'll try to use some tools to create an XSD, and I'll use the same tool to generate an XML based on XSD. So before going with an example, let me try to summarize the previous sessions. So you guys have seen the XML basics, and you guys have seen about the namespaces, target namespaces, and other XSD basic stuff. So in general, or XML schema, let me type over here what XML schema is. So XML schema, you can say XML schema, it defines what grammar. Say each language has a grammar. Similar XML schema defines a grammar for your XML document. For an XML document. So this is the statement: XML schema defines a grammar for an XML document. So this is what XML schema here is XSD. Grammar for an XML document. So what it defines? So it defines so many things. XSD defines elements. It defines attributes. We define attributes here in XSD. We define namespaces. Please don't consider the spelling mistakes here. We define the order of elements, or we define number of occurrences. These are all about in XSD. We define all these types, or all these kind of variables. In Java we call this different types of variables, different types of classes, objects, like that. In XSD we define elements, attributes, namespaces, order, number of occurrences, and maybe it might have some other than this also, but I can remember these things now. Restrictions. So these are all we can define using a XSD, and so these are the grammar for XML document. So we can say one thing here: if XML follows XSD, then it is called a valid XML document, right? So in the previous lessons we see, if we follow proper syntax rules, we can call it as a proper XML document. This one here, if XML follows XSD, then it is called valid XML document. We can call, if it follows syntax, we can call it proper XML document, and it is a valid XML document when it follows an XSD. So XSD has an .xsd extension. XSD files, the schema files with a XSD extension. And all elements, we can, the elements which we define in XSD are provided by the W3C. So to define elements, to define attributes, to define all of these, we should follow again an XSD. We define, we have to follow some other XML document which is in XSD. So that is called, all elements. I'll try to write down here. All elements that we use in XSD are provided by W3C. So the elements which we define in XSD provided by W3C. So that means this XSD will have a namespace, which is provided by the W3C. We'll see that in our example. So for instance, if it is an employee, we have an XML document, then this should have employee.xsd. So everything we define in employee.xsd. I mean all the grammar which are required for employee.xml. So otherwise we can say, XSD is a contract. XSD is a contract between two applications. In a way it is, say for say communicating between application 1 and application 2, we communicate, or the communication barrier is going to be XML. To communicate between application 1 and application 2, something like this is going to be a requester, and app 1 is requesting some information from app 2, and app 2 will give some response back to app 1. So both applications are communicating with XML or with the help of an XML as a standard. But I define something at the application 1, and application 2, they won't be able to understand properly, though the XML has metadata and data. This application 2 might send or give the response using a different using different tags. Or application 1 and application 2, to make these two systems in a contract, we have to define an XSD. So that is something XSD. So this has an XML and XSD between the contracts for an XML and for an XSD. So to communicate when we have two systems to communicate, we are using XML. For an XML, there should be a contract, that is an XSD schema definition. That is in short. And the other topic which we covered about namespaces. This is a very important topic even for Oracle SOA. This is namespaces. I'll try to say namespaces. What namespaces does? It identifies uniquely all XML namespaces. It will uniquely identify the XML components. Uniquely identify the XML components. We create, in another way, we create the target namespaces in a schema file. I'll write an example here. Generally, we create the target namespaces in schema file. Something like, we can in schema file means it's an XSD, just XSD. So we create all these target namespaces, in the XSD. Say how the target namespaces will be. Say you have Amazon and eBay. So both are having target namespace. In XSD we have to define target namespaces for both orders, Amazon and eBay order. So how we'll define in, say, HTTP amazon.com/order, and in for the similar we define say ebay.com/order. So this is the general URL, you can say, Amazon order and eBay order URLs. To use this in our XSD, or to make Amazon and eBay orders, to use this both the things in our XML or XSD, we have to say prefix. With the help of prefix we define these. I'll try to copy paste here. Don't worry, I'll try to put in another example in Notepad++ or Eclipse. So how we define? We define these in XSD with XML NS, say AMZ equals to this one, so that we can use this prefix to use the elements from this codes, okay, from this Amazon orders. And set for the same thing, XMLNS EBY, similar thing. So to differentiate this while using it in XML, we define all these things in XSD, and when we use this in XML, assume each order has a line item and address or shipping address. Each order will have an item in the invoice, and it will have the shipping address. So now, while we define this in our XML, we have to define, say, like order XMLNS. Same, I'll try to copy this here to save the time. See, XMLNS, we define that way here, and to take out the elements from this target namespace, we have to say, since we defined as with the prefix, assume like this order has line item and shipping address as elements. Now to use those, I should use the prefix of this, and I can go and use some line item or invoice number, whatever, like this, and Amazon address or shipping address. So in the same way, if we are going to use both the Amazon and eBay order related in our XML file, so we have to use a similar thing. like this. I can copy it. So I can copy and need to change this, only this. And now to differentiate both the line items and both the shipping addresses, I can go and change the prefix here while defining this in XML. So the point here is, we can use the target namespaces to define a target namespace in XSD so that we can use that same target namespace in an XML, if and this will help you to differentiate the similar type of elements also. So like Amazon has an orders and eBay has an order. So to differentiate this, I use the prefix. Better, it might be confusing you guys. So I'll try to Notepad++, maybe if not Notepad, I'll try to use an Eclipse. You can use any tool. You can use even JDeveloper and Notepad++ also. But Notepad++ you can validate in XML files, but the creation of an XSD and XML files would not be that easy using Notepad++, or you can use even JDeveloper also. Since Eclipse is more famous one, I'll try to use Eclipse only here. Say I'll create a project here. Go to other project and just type XML here. You can see XML related things. So now I'll create in first a schema file. So I'll create this definition of the XML file, that is a schema definition file first, and I will use Eclipse option to create an XML file based on XSD. I mean, don't worry, generally in SOAP we never required to create an XSD and XML files manually from scratch. It does everything for you, but only thing, if you want to customize those, or if you want to understand those XSD and XML files, you have to aware each and every point in XML and XSD, at least the basics which I'm trying to cover here. So XML schema file, so let me say an example, a patient. Or even first I'll try to create the project here instead of creating files separately. I'll say general project, and you can have the job right also, that is fine. So this is a patient. I want to create a patient XML, so I'm naming it as patient XML and just say finish. Alright, so we have a project here, and I will create a, one second, my mouse click is not working fine. Yeah, the button. Okay, now I'll try to create a file, maybe with an XML. So I want to create an XML schema file first, that is XSD file now, and I'll name it as a patient.xsd. patient.xsd. Just I'll say finish. So it is going to create an XSD file for you. I mean, the basic syntax it creates for you. This is the beauty of these tools, either JDeveloper or Eclipse. I'll just go into source mode. So let me Control Shift F. Okay, I'm just formatting the XSD file so that we can view even the full line. So here, as I said before in the previous lessons, um, the XSD file will start with a tag, the root tag, that is a schema. So you see this an XML NS namespace, XML schema. This is what I was talking about. W3 schools, or sorry, W3C organization. They have defined this XML schema to create an XSD file. So even the schema element which we are seeing, this has been defined in this XML schema. Even you can go to this file, this location, and you can even try to see also. Say, see, I'm just copying it, and I'll try to open the same here. So this is XML schema, and you have an XML schema document here, and you can see this is what the complete XSD file which we are referring there. And if you find for schema, see, it has defined the schema element here. So use it on this, using this XSD file, we are creating these all elements. So that means it's a namespace. It's a target namespace for the XML schema, the XSD file, and it is going to be namespace here to create a schema XSD file. But we have a target namespace here. So this target namespace is something like your package in Java. So we define a package in Java class so that you can simulate with a target namespace. So this is going to be an import to the other Java file. So this is going to be a namespace for your XML file, right? So I'll try to start a small example. So I'm going to define an XSD here with some patient information, basic patient information. Let me try to type over here. Say element. I'm defining element here. Just you say ELE and say control space. You get the element tag completely. So now I'm defining this as patient, and I wanted to define this as a type is patient. So all attributes should have this. Okay. So it is showing an error because it is not able to find out a type for this element, right? So that is the thing. So this is a simple element, the base element. Now I'm going to define a complex element for this element type. So that is called, I've defined it here. So since it has the target namespace defined with the TNS name here, it's the same name, target namespace, and we have prefix here. So I'm following the same here. I'll say TNS and patient here. Let me define. So now we are defining this complex element type below to this element tag. So let's say complex control space. It will define everything for you. So the name is a patient. This is TNS is just a prefix because since we have defined a TNS as a prefix for this target namespace, so we are using it here. So the complex type name is a patient, so use the same. So you might see that error is gone. So since it found the relation of this complex type, so the error is gone now. So now the patient, I'll define the elements required for this patient type. So something like patient name, patient date of birth, email, and patient the payment type, and other stuff. So it has a list of elements. So I'll define it's a sequence. So I wanted to start the patient information with the name, and it should followed with the email ID, or followed with the phone number, or followed with the date of birth, and followed with the age. So I wanted to make it in sequence order, just a sequence. So this is the beauty, you don't require to remember this. If you say yes EQ and say control space, it gives an option what are the available tags or elements here. So sequence, now I want to define elements here. Element name, attribute, I'll define ID, and say type, I can say type of it is going to be int. I don't want to define as a complex type, so it's a simple one. So I'll define as an int, and it should be the double quotes. So now I'll have another element, say suppose age. Age should be age, sorry, it's a name equals to age, and type is going to be something like your Java type. Age is going to be again integer, and even ID, patient ID is going to be an integer. Now I'll define another one, which is a string type. Element name equals to patient name, and type is string. I want to define this as a string. So now you define 3 elements under this sequence of patient type, right? Now maybe I'll try to create an XML for this XSD so that we can understand, and we do small validations also. See, now this is done. XSD I created. I'll just format it out. Right click on this XSD, new, other. I want to create an XML file. Maybe I'll say patient.xml. Just say patient.xml, and I want to create an XML from the schema file, because I already created an XSD, so I want to create an XML file on by using this XSD. I mean, because I've defined the grammar. Now it should, using this grammar, it can, I mean, the Eclipse will give you an option to create an XML file. So what XML file, in under patient XML as a project name, I wanted to use this XSD file to create a XML file here. Say next, and simply say finish here, and just go to source, and see it has created, let me format it. Okay, now it has created with a element TNS patient. So if you see here, this is what we defined as a prefix for this target namespace. So this is the target namespace for this XSD, and the same thing is www.example.org /patient is going to be a namespace for this XML. See, example.com patient, and the other one, the schema instance, whatever the tags it is going to be, what elements is going to be the prefix XSI. If at all I'm going to use it in different place, I can use this prefix here. And the schema location, basically which is talking about your patient XSD file. So this is just a reference to an XSD, the schema location file with a name and the patient.xsd file. And the tags over here, ID, age, name, if you see, those are we defined written as an elements here under complex type. But the main element is going to be the patient element. So this is what DNS patient. Under patient, I have created a complex type with the ID, age, and name. So in Eclipse, you just simply try to say valid and say type something here, patient ID and patient age and the patient name, user 1, just say save it as, and click on this XML and say right click and say validate, and see whether it is whether all the things which we created are proper or not. Just say validate and it shows you a message, the validation completed with no errors or warning. So the XML which is placed here with the grammatically and everything is proper now. There are no mistakes over here, or no errors, no warnings. If I say it's an ID, patient ID, instead of 1, instead of the numerical number, if I type something ABC, it is showing an error. It's a different error, I believe. It's the same. The value ABC of element TNS ID is not valid. So this is supposed to be element which is it is not valid. That means it is expecting an integer value, but you have entered a string value. You can save this and you try to say validate also. You should get the same error. The validation completed 2 errors were discovered, 1 resource validated under the second, and you can see the same error message here. Data type. It is saying ABC is not a valid value for integer. So it is expecting integer, but you entered string value here. And if I delete this and say 1, just save it as and validate, now it should be good now, right? Okay. And what else we have defined it in patient.xsd? We defined sequence. So sequence, now if I define a name as a first element, it should show an error in XML. So what I do, I'll just copy this name and I'll just change the sequence. So it is showing an error, invalid content was found, something blah blah blah. So that means if you see it as it is since you set it as a sequence, so it should follow the sequence order here. I'll try to save it and try validate. It shows the exact error message. Right click, save and validate, and it shows the same error. In fact, yeah, in detail now at least. So now if I change it back and say save, I'm changing the order again to old sequence, that is patient ID, patient age, and patient name. Now as per the XSD, it should be good. So let's say patient.xml, sorry, right click and say validate. So now the validation completed with no errors or warnings. So that means no errors and no warnings. So this is a simple XSD file and the XML file creation. It has other things also. I'll try to explain now. So there are other attributes. Now if I copy this name, copy this name element 2 times, let's see what it shows. So if I, oh, not here, sorry, this should not be changed, and I'm trying to say in XML file I wanted to have 2 names for the same patient ID. So see, it shows an error here. Or even if you try to validate, say right click and say validate, it shows an error, so it is not proper. So invalid content was found starting with element TNS name. No child element is expected at this point. So it is not expecting another element here. So the reason it is not, since it's not allowing, so we have not defined any attribute for this. There are some attributes. Say in here I say min occurs or max occurs. Max occurs, I will define it as 2. So it will allow to define this element 2 times. Now click on patient.xml and say validate. Okay. See, now the validation is there are no validation errors as such now. We'll try it one more time. Say validate, and there are no validation errors. The reason we define an attribute with a max occur, so this element can occur 2 times. So this is, and you have another one more attribute called min occurs. If you don't want to, if you say this name is not compulsory, this name element, you can define min occurs as 0, or so you can say min occurs 1. So that means you should not skip this element at any chance. So make max occurs and min occurs. There is one more, and say age field. I wanted to define 2. Of course, it does not make any sense to have 2 or more age elements, but just for an example, I can say max occurs I'll say unbounded. So that means you can define this age element n number of times. Now this age, so you define n number of times, you won't see any error. The reason being, we defined this for this element. We defined it's a max occurs unbounded. You can define n number of times. There is no restriction over here. So another one is to define a simple type. To define a simple type, we have shown you how to define the complex type here. So I'll try to put one more example for maybe name complex type, and you say the patient.xml file. I'll try to revert back, or even I can try to remove the unnecessary stuff here, which will make you confuse more. I'll remove this, and for safety purpose, I'll just say validate. So there are no validation errors. Now my intention is I want to define, or I want to say the name should be 5 characters. It should be 5 characters. So how I can define? So this already says it's a type string. Now I want to define a simple type over here below, and I'll put some a validation there. I'll put some restriction simply. So what should I do? After complex type, I define a simple type. Just say simple and just control space. You can see this tag, simple type, name as in some name. I'll put the name, and simple type. I'm defining a type, something the way it is string here. I'm defining one more simple type for my element name. Say I want to restrict with a restriction. This is available tags. We have to remember this tag. There is no other way. Restriction. I want to put restriction with some length. I want to have the restriction of only it should allow 5 characters. Restriction by extending the existing data type, that is string. What is the restriction? The max length. You can have all the elements here. You can see all the elements. Max length I want to define as 5 characters. And now you just defined the simple type, right? So you have to give this simple type name over here. Instead of string, I want to define it's a name, and say it should be with the TNS. Since you defined here, it should be TNS colon a name. So let me type it here. Since we defined as a prefix, so it is TNS name. Even if you say control space or TNT space control space, you can see the available types over here. So now this element is going to be string, no doubt. And only thing, you are adding the restriction for this element. So now if I go back here and say it's a 5 characters, I'll say another character, maybe user or anyone. So it should show an error here. Or if not, you can save and right click and say validate. It will tell you the error. The max length, the actual length is 7, but it should allow only 5 letters. So but if you keep 5 letters, the error should be moved. Yeah, there is no error. I'm just validating this again. Validate. No validation errors and warnings. So that is how the simple type will work. And we have seen the complex type also, and we have seen the attributes, max occurs, min occurs, which is unbounded, and other things. So yeah, and the other thing which we have to see, complex type, inside complex type, and inner also complex type. I mean the inner type is complex type. I'll try to say define insurance or payment. Element name equals to payment. I'll define it as a payment. Simple. I'm defining a type equals to maybe I'll define the payment type. Since I'm just defining the element, the name before itself, but the general practice is we have to define it before. payment type we have to define. So after complex type, I can define another complex type here. We have shown, or I just shown you to define the simple type here for the name. So inside complex type, you have simple, sorry for this, simple type of name. I mean, inside complex type you have an element for the name, and you change the type as a simple type here. Instead of string, you define your own simple type which extended the base one, that is string. Now you're defining another element inside this complex, and this is again is going to be a complex type. I'll show you what I mean here. So payment type, so it's a complex type I defined. So the name is a payment type. Since it has a prefix, so I think all spelling is proper. TNS. So now the error should be gone. Okay. So now you define the complex type here, and you define element here, and you named it as a payment type, and it's a payment type. Now you have to say what you have to use. You're going to use. Now I'll use an under payment type. For generally patient, you have you can pay by cash or you can pay by insurance. So for that I should say choice. So he has a choice to pay it in two ways. So the first choice element is going to be, the name is going to be cash. And type int, cash is int, and I'll have another element, and its name is going to be insurance. And I have to define the type. Now I'll say type here. I'll try to define another another complex type. Inside complex I will define another complex, say type insurance details. So insurance details, I'll define type insurance. So this is another element, complex element inside complex. I should not get confused here. So inside choice, this is a complex type. So this is done. Now you have defined complex type here. Now you have defined another complex type here, so I should have another complex type here. So the name is going to be insurance. Let's see, insurance, and since this has a prefix, I'll say TNS insurance, so the error is gone. Now inside this complex type, I wanted to say the provider, the insurance provider, and generally for the insurance, the limit. Now I want to use everything, all the tags inside this. Say element, so element, I will define a name, that is provider. The name is provider for this insurance. So the type is string. He has to give the provider name, and this is going to be general string. And I'll define the name, limit, the insurance provider limit, and the type is going to be absolutely integer. So now this is the best example. Yeah. With this, at least with this, you should be able to understand the simple types, complex type, and default element types. So this complex type element, I'll try to remove the spaces here. It would be clear. I'll format. I'll remove this. I mean, unless I'm just removing unnecessary space so that it is readable. Format it. Okay, I'll try to explain now. Under this complex type, we define an element with the payment, and inside this you have another complex type, a payment type. Under payment tab you have a choice to pay, that is either through cash or insurance. Under insurance, I have defined with another complex type with this name insurance, same name insurance with the TNS as a prefix. Under this insurance I have a tag called all, so you should provide the provider name and limit. Complex type. So this is complete reverse way. This is a reference with this insurance, and this insurance, the complex type is referred here, right? Okay, now what we do, we go back to our XML file. And now we should define we have defined another payment type. So after name there should be patient is not complete. Okay, so it is saying it requires another tag we have already defined here, that is payment. So it's expecting you to define the patient the payment type here. So I'll define that TNS. So it has not taken. So what we do, it has not taken. So we will remove this file and create XML file again, because it has done the changes but it is not reflecting. So I will just remove this XML file and I will create another XML. I want to create an XML file using this XSD. So I will define the name as same previous name, patient. Create an XML from XML schema XSD, and I'll select this XSD file and just say finish. So now yep. So it is just showing an error of your restriction, because the name should be 5 characters. Just some name. It is showing some syntax error. It's not syntax error, it's just spelling check, general notepad errors. So if you define some other valid name, okay, just say test. I'm saving it. So if you observe here, it has created a patient here, payment as an element, and it has a cash as a default element again here. So now it has taken cash. So the choice is you can either give cash or insurance. So if you give cash, it's a simple normal element here. So it's just an integer value. So I can have say cash 1000, and I will define the patient ID as 1 and age 34. Say test, or just validate. So it is validated with no errors and no warnings. So that is great. So the payment is one element, so it can have either of these elements, a choice you can define. So what if you have an element insurance? I want to have an insurance here instead of this. So now I'll remove this. See, once you have control space, it will show you both cash and insurance elements. You don't want a cash element here since you've already seen this. Now I want to go with the insurance. So under insurance, this XSD insurance is a type. Under insurance you have a complex type, so it is going to have another complex type, that is provider and limit. So that means you should have both the elements, provider, BCBS, BCBSM, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, and so if you see this, it is showing already error, so it should have another element. So it is expecting limit. So since we have defined it as an all, so this insurance they should provide the insurance provider information and limit. Then only you won't see a validation errors. If you not provide, it will show an errors here. So I'll say TN is limit. I'll say 5,000. That's the limit, and say save and just say validate. So no errors, no warnings. So this is what the complete, I think, best example for your XSD and XML. So with this we have covered the sample XML and XSD, and I've explained again about XML basics and XSD basics on Notepad. So I believe you got some knowledge on this XML XSD, and these are all required stuff to start the SOA basics of SOA programming. Thank you so much. Maybe in the next video I'll try to cover a WSDL basics, WSDL basics. Then we are good to start SOA hello world example. Thank you so much.